It is a Thursday night, 11:27 p.m. Pacific time, and I've been off my Monday at 5 p.m. upload schedule because of traveling and, as I explained in my last video, just kind of some shifts in my schedule, I guess. But as I said in my last video, this week would be just kind of whenever it felt right to put on a video. So it's interesting that often the times that often the times that I most want to record if I'm off schedule are like the times when I'm looking for clarity on things. And there's something for me about talking things out. I guess it sounds obvious because that's what people do in therapy. I guess these videos feel very therapeutic to me, and my hope is always that what I'm saying will give you insight or inspire you to think about things in a certain way as well. That's always just what I'm hoping for, if not at least you finding some sort of entertainment and listening to me talk about my own life. I've been feeling a lot of, hey, Vince is here. It's always nice to see familiar faces. I was going to read some comments from my most recent videos because I haven't done written responses to them in a bit, and I just want you guys to always know that I'm listening. I did my last video while I was in New Orleans for my friend's wedding, which was really wonderful, and it always takes me some time after I travel to kind of get things back together, and I really feel very scattered. I think it's because I worked on this show for a couple weeks and I'm still kind of technically working on it, and the traveling, and then it feels like there was something else. So it's just like, it feels like a lot happened at once that was a little bit abnormal for me. I don't normally travel so much at once, and working on set on a production for the first time in a while was also just kind of threw some things off, and I'm just also trying to catch up on sleep and all of that. So I do feel discombobulated, but I also feel discombobulated. Maybe that's not the best word, but I feel like I'm trying to sort through things and figure out some specific direction. And I've just been doing a lot of reflecting, but I kind of feel like I need to do a lot more. And I'm really craving more stillness, and that's feeling very important to me. But the struggle is often finding the time for stillness when it seems like time is moving so fast and there's so much happening. And one of the things I've been reflecting a lot about is just how we're in this time right now with social media, and it's an amazing thing, and I still feel like many people are still trying to find their grounding when it comes to that and how to really use social media. And it's really interesting for me. I think I get easily triggered, and I've been noticing my triggers a lot and really paying attention to kind of like old wounds, old emotions. And one thing I've mentioned a few times in the past few videos is how I had been reading this book about being raised by a narcissistic mother. And I had never really heard that term before, or at least like identified that with my own mom. But through reading this book, I feel like that's a very good definition of her, because not only does it sound a lot like her, the traits of a narcissistic mother, but also the experiences of a daughter of a narcissistic mother. And it's been really fascinating for me because I feel like that's helped me identify a lot of the challenges that I have. And it's almost like that book opened my brain up so much, and I became hyper aware of how I react to things and what triggers me. And I don't know if that's like the source. Like, is it just because of the way my mother raised me and treated me as a child? Does that like explain everything? You know, like when you try to go back to childhood issues with your parents, like you can discover so much about yourself, and it's kind of this uncovering, this unraveling. And I don't know, does it all stem from one place, or is it just kind of this domino effect? But in terms of the social media side of it, I personally find myself getting triggered by social media because it feels so, to me, very like in the ego, I guess, or very competitive. It feels like people competing for attention and feeling the need to get validation and feeling the need to show their lives in a certain way and be a certain way, be perceived in a certain way, and recently I've just been feeling really, really sensitive to that. I think I'm probably always sensitive to it, but like lately I find myself retracting farther and farther away from social media. And yet I also have noticed this like craving for it. And so when I pay very close attention to my relationship with social media on a personal level, but also on the business side of it, like trying to keep those separate is very interesting because my career is so interwoven into my personal life. But just examining how I respond to social media and how I'm affected by certain things. And I feel this like this push and pull, this tug of war type of experience where I will want to go on social media. It's become, I'm sure many of you can relate to this, and let me know if you can, but it's like, especially on my phone, like it's muscle memory, like going onto my phone and immediately like pushing the Facebook button and the Instagram button and the Twitter button just to go see updates and notifications and, scroll through when I'm bored. And I've just been trying to pay such close attention to how I use my phone and those moments where I'm kind of bored, like even for a few seconds, like that desire to just reach for the phone to distract myself, to reach for the phone to entertain myself. And because I'm easily triggered by social media, at least in this point in my life, it's this like yearning for it. And then when I experience social media, there's also like this triggering where then it's like I feel like a hit on my self-esteem or something. Like I'll get triggered and like go down this rabbit hole of emotions, and that ties into like the narcissistic mother thing, because like a very common trait of daughters of narcissistic mothers, now that I've been reading about this, is feelings of not being good enough. And that's, again, if you've been following my videos for a while, you'll know that that's like an ongoing theme for me. And so what happens when I go on social media oftentimes is comparison, is like comparing my personal life and my professional life to other people and feeling like, they're doing certain things, so why should I bother doing them? Or they're doing things that are better than me, or, just like that sort of thing. And from a logical standpoint, there's like a side of me that knows I shouldn't be doing that, especially because I know other people that have those same emotions, and from an outside, unbiased standpoint, I can encourage other people not to go down that rabbit hole. And so I feel fortunate to identify those patterns, but yet I think if you've spent most of your life, like I have, feeling not good enough, it's so hard to get out of those habits. Like it's a habit of not feeling good enough. It's like this old mental thought, this old programming. And no matter how many times I can say to myself that I'm good enough, and no matter how many times other people can say that to me, it's been going on for almost all my life and so deeply ingrained in me that it's not that easy to just snap out of it, right? Words don't usually, it's a temporary effect. However, there are certain moments that I found really helpful. I've talked about this before, but one of my favorite books is called The 5 Love Languages, and it talks about how each person has a different way that they feel loved. And my love language is my number one. I always forget the order of them, but I think my number one is words of affirmation, and number two is quality time. I'll have to go do the test again, but for me, it does really help when I have positive words of affirmation, but it's simultaneously very hurtful when I receive criticism. And I found myself also feeling like very sensitive to criticism because a lot of my emotional wounds from childhood stem from feeling very frequently criticized by my mother and not frequently receiving positive words of affirmation from her. So I think it's like part of craving that, right? But anyways, I do have like a very positive story that was helpful for me yesterday. My uncle, on my mother's side, my favorite uncle, called me up, and I answered the phone because it's rare for him to call me. And he was with somebody that he's working with. He's, I think, like a consultant or something. I don't even know what my uncle does right now. He's got like a new job, and I believe it has something to do with consulting. And he told me that he was with a guy, I think, that had hired him for a job, and this guy had recently gone vegan, I think like in the past 6 months, and he's a 65-year-old man, I believe lives in Atlanta, and my uncle just thought that it would be kind of neat for him to talk to me because he had told this man about my website, and this guy checked out my website and was impressed by it, and so he just wanted to say hi, right? So I ended up talking to this man, and he's telling me about how much going vegan had changed him. I think he definitely has had or has diabetes, and I'm guessing it's diabetes type 2 because after going vegan, a lot of his symptoms diminished really, really quickly. And so he's going on and talking about the profound impact of going vegan on him and how he doesn't know anyone. I'm almost positive that he told me that I was the very first vegan he'd ever talked to because he lives in an area where he doesn't know any other vegans. He's 65, like most people around him are eating the standard American diet, and it was just this really amazing conversation, and he kept telling me how much he liked my work, and I guess I found myself feeling really surprised by it because I've been so hard on myself and so in this comparison trap that I get in my head and feel like my work is not good enough. And I often go through these phases of feeling like, why do I even bother? Because I get in that not good enough cycle, right? And so it's profoundly important and just kind of an opportunity for me to like step back and try to see myself from an unbiased perspective of somebody that's so grateful for what I'm doing, even though I feel like I could be doing so much better. And, you know, he's raving about my website, and I barely touch my website. Like, I feel like my website is in shambles right now. You know, like, somehow it's helping somebody. And, you know, I always appreciate it when you guys say those things. But it's also very easy for me to just, like, disregard it because I'm so used to feeling not good enough, if that makes sense, right? And so it's so interesting how, yeah, it's just like, so, I don't know. I don't know if that's common for a lot of people and if social media has a lot to do with that. I don't know if there's this cultural idea of not being good enough. Like, does that really have that much to do with my specific experience of being raised by a narcissistic mother? Are a lot of people raised by narcissists? Are we in a narcissistic society? Like, that's the other thing is, I don't know if I classically fall into narcissism. I'll have to examine that more about myself, but I feel like what I've noticed in talking to other daughters of narcissistic mothers is that narcissistic daughters of narcissistic mothers tend to try so hard to not be like their mothers. And so I find myself sometimes having behavior similar to her and then immediately trying to correct it. Like, that's another thing that I've been noticing. And I have like these tendencies to get kind of narcissistic in my behavior and then like pull myself back and be like, whoa, I need to stop. But it's also interesting when people around my age, I notice narcissistic behavior in them, and it's like, I feel like maybe if you aren't raised by narcissistic parents, then maybe it's like takes turns. Like, you know, there's always like it skips a generation or something like that. I don't know. It's really fascinating to me. And I think our society really rewards narcissism in a lot of ways. And I guess it's like kind of frightening to me on a very personal level, because I know how hard it was for me to be raised that way, and then also to feel affected now in my life by other narcissistic people. So last night, for example, I had an incident with somebody who may have narcissistic traits, and I just like felt very hurt by that behavior, and then I was able to kind of talk myself through it and not take it so personally. But I also had this kind of conflict of wondering, like, how do we even deal with this? Like, we're kind of in this time right now where, and maybe we're always really in this time of responding to all sorts of like social behavior, right? So I guess we're always going through this, but it feels pretty heightened now. I don't know if it feels heightened because I'm at a very reflective time in my life, and so like I'm really noticing these things, or it's getting a lot of media attention, but it's like there's so many stories that come out, and again, it must be the media, because media is also it keeps escalating our access to news and our ability to have conversations. Like, one of the benefits of social media is that we can connect with one another and have conversations very easily online with people all across the world, and be more easily notified about things happening. Like, all you have to do is go on Facebook for a minute and you can get like a snapshot of what's happening across the world. And that to me is amazing, right? If I could just go on Facebook and like get news and hear like positive things, I'd be thrilled. What I would not like to see on Facebook is people bragging about their lives, and, you know, for me feeling triggered because I'm comparing my life to theirs, right? And anyways, that's the stuff that I like makes me not want to go on social media. But the stuff I love about social media is like learning things and feeling inspired by things, and having like deep, real connection as much as possible in social media. But anyways, I feel like there's so much talk about social justice, and so we've got things like the Harvey Weinstein situation, and how now we're having this opportunity to examine just kind of even more so the roles between men and women, and the abuse of power and sexual harassment, and how we interact with each other, and what's appropriate and what's not, and how some people will abuse power and some people feel like they have to do certain things in order to get what they want. You know, that's such an interesting conversation, and it's an opportunity for us to just pay more attention to the way that we really communicate and what's acceptable and what's not. And I don't really know where I was going with that fully. I think maybe the narcissism part of it, you know, there's a lot of narcissistic behavior that we see played out around our lives, and I think the more that we can learn about that, and maybe, I know where I was going with that. I was thinking about how to deal with narcissistic people. And you know, for me, like, it's really interesting, like, when you have a family member that's narcissistic, like a mother in my case, it's this weird situation of wanting to protect yourself and your emotions, but also not, for me, I don't want to be completely separated from my mother. Like, I really value family, and there's a lot of great things about my mother that I want in my life, you know, and life is precious. We never know how long we're going to have people in our lives. And so there's this process that I'm going through of trying to figure out how to relate to my mother now that I'm becoming more and more aware of how her behavior has affected me and continues to affect me, right? It's still ongoing. But it's really interesting too when you notice narcissistic traits in people that you're not related to, right? So just like friends and acquaintances. And I was having a discussion earlier today with somebody about this, and we were just kind of reflecting on like, what do you do with these people? Do you accept their behavior? Is it fully their fault that they're narcissists? I mean, I look at someone like my mom and a lot of narcissists that I've met before where maybe, they may not even realize fully what they're doing. They may think that what their behavior is completely just, right? And that's the thing psychologically that's always so fascinating to me, is that I feel like a great majority of people are living and acting with good intentions. It's just that not all our intentions are in alignment with each other. And certainly there are people that may be purposefully manipulating and maybe trying to get away with things that they know are not good. I don't know. I always want to put a disclaimer that unless I'm fully knowledgeable about something, you got to take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But from the bits and pieces I've heard about Harvey Weinstein, it seems to me like he was abusing his power. And he got to a point where he was getting away with it, and he was able to, after a certain number of time, he kind of realized that if he could use women in the way that he was doing because he had so much power, right? Is that truly like a cruel, horrible thing? I'm not sure, because I think in many ways we can relate to that behavior, even if it's on a small level, right? We might not be able to relate to sexual harassment, right? We can say, many of us would say, like, I would never do that. But can we reflect and think about elements in our lives where we've done something that we know we probably shouldn't be doing, but we've justified it because we've gotten away with it, or we've justified it because it's really not that bad in our minds? Like, I think that there's kind of this spectrum, and I talked about this a few videos ago too, with like, crime and all that. Like, there's a lot of things at the core that we can relate to, because it's just kind of different, in my opinion, extremes, right? So some of us act a little bit more extreme than others, or massively more extreme. But yet, if we really like break things down, these are behaviors that many of us have experienced or performed in one way or another. And so I think it's very easy to have a knee-jerk reaction and say, like, this person hurt me, and blame it on them. I'm a big believer in taking personal responsibility and saying, okay, what can I do? What do I have control over here? Like, that's a big mission of mine. And a theme in these videos you'll see is like, I'm trying to figure out what I can take control of and how I can best operate in my life. And so I could sit here and say, like, oh, my mom, like, the way she raised me and treated me growing up, like, and I could just be angry at her, and I could decide that my whole life is the way it is because of her, and kind of like pin her as like this horrible person. Or I could sit here and try to think like, hey, what do I have control of now, and how can I take personal responsibility to work through that and make that change and heal those old wounds, right? But also there's part of me that's like, why is my mom like that? Like, what happened? And in this other instance that I had yesterday with who may be a narcissistic person, I'm not sure, but had some of those similar traits, I also had this moment of hurt, but then I had this moment of like, why is that person acting that way, and what happened, what triggered that, and why is that person acting the way that they are? And I feel like that comes down to compassion and for me, if we can see compassion, if we can try to look at what somebody else might be going through, it humanizes it more, and maybe we can feel less reactive and less hurt by it, and try to see, like, everyone's going through their own struggles, and not all of us are great at dealing with it. Not all of us make wise decisions. Maybe, I hope that most people are doing the best that they can with what they know how to do. We have different backgrounds, we have different whether it's our parents, whether it's people around us, anyone, our caregivers, our friends, our influences, what's happening in the world at the time that we were born and we were children and we were teenagers, like the schools that we went, like there's so many factors that go into shaping who we are. And then the constant changing of our society too, I always find so interesting. Like, social media, like I said, it just happens to be something that triggers me based on things that I've experienced in my life, I guess. And so since society is always changing and technology is evolving and all of this stuff, you never know when you're going to be triggered by something because things are always changing. I don't know. These are the things that I've been reflecting on, and it's challenging for me because this is so interwoven into the career path that I've chosen with social media, and I have this deep desire to help people. My big mission in life is to relieve suffering, and there's so many different ways that I would like to relieve suffering, and it's kind of just trying to figure out how to do that while also figuring out how to relieve my own suffering in whatever small, minute ways or bigger ways that I experience it emotionally. I'm going to check out some of the comments here, and then I'm going to check out comments on past videos that I haven't read yet. So let's see. Kim said, our lives mirror each other so much. I hope, Kim, that you have some things to reflect on after all this talk too. Let's see. And Glagma 10 says, if you think you have narcissistic traits, you most likely are not the one. Narcissists are everywhere, so important to know that they have a pathology. Just notice that, but try not to take their pathology in. Hard for an empath or anyone. Vince said, I've seen this a lot recently with some people in my life. I used to be sucked into that environment, but since removing myself and then going back into it, I've become much more aware of what's going on. That awareness is such a huge thing, like for me, awareness is everything. And I'm so drawn to psychology because I feel like the more you can learn about psychology, the more easily it is to identify things and become aware. And when you're self-aware, but also aware of what other people may or may not be going through, it shifts everything. And it can take it away from this blame game. And, like I said, I'm such a big proponent for personal responsibility. And I think a lot of the issues we have in society is people not being aware enough. And so knee-jerk reactions happening, a lot of blaming and not taking responsibility. And of course also maybe not enough compassion. So one thing I really know that I want to work more on and help more in the world is helping people become more compassionate. And I think compassion starts so much with awareness, right? Veganism is about being aware, and veganism is also so much about compassion. And so if I can encourage you guys at all to become more self-aware and then aware of other people and more compassionate about other people, even if it feels impossible. Like I said a few videos ago when I was talking about the Las Vegas shooting, can we have compassion for a killer? I know I can. As crazy it may seem, like that's still a person who somehow their life led them to some point where they made that decision. We can pin that decision as being good and bad, but there's still like a compassion for what happened, Like I was talking about the death penalty, I think it was last night, and I was having such a fascinating conversation about it, and it's such an extreme topic, but it's so fascinating, even just like our judicial system and how like complicated that is, and how we determine, like, does somebody get a life sentence, or a, do they go in death row? Are they, sentenced to death? Are they sentenced to life in prison? Do they have 10 years in prison? Like, all of these things that, and we determine like who deserves what and what impact their decisions make. And sometimes we wrongly, what's the word I'm looking for? Someone is wrongly accused of things. I was watching this documentary on Netflix last night. It's called, Vince, if you're still watching it, had a Dodgers theme to it, and I was thinking of you. I think it's called Long Shot, and it's on Netflix. If you guys like watching like justice films, this one's really fascinating, and it's got an interesting twist to it. So I'm almost positive it's called Long Shot on Netflix. It's like a short 45-minute long mini documentary, and it's about somebody that was accused of something, and that's all I'll say for now. But I've always felt fascinated watching documentaries like this and how these decisions are made about who deserves what, and did they do it, did they not, and all of that. But, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's just all very fascinating. The whole psychology that goes into making up who somebody is really the big point of today's discussion. All right, one more comment. Lagma 10 said, we can't avoid them, but best to have limited interaction with narcissists. That limit is what you can handle without being affected, the point where you can still wish them well. Yeah, I think that wishing people well is such a important thing, like truly wishing somebody well. That was another thing in the conversation about like the death sentence. Like, the person I was talking to about this was saying like, well, maybe it's worse to give somebody life in prison. And I said, well, why is that worse? And they said, well, because they have to live out their life in prison and they're suffering. It makes maybe it feel like they've earned it. And I was just reflecting on that in that moment, thinking like, is that just our ego, like trying to punish somebody for something? Like, punishment is also a fascinating thing. Like, when somebody kills somebody else, like, you can't get that life back. So really, what does it do to give someone life in prison, right? Like, we're punishing them for killing somebody, and we're keeping them in jail for the rest of their lives. And for me, it's just so fascinating. Like, is that just to make us feel better? It's not going to bring the person or persons that they killed back, right? And in a way, I started thinking about like this is such a long story, but this is the surface level. Something else I have a lot more to learn about. But I was just reflecting on, all the people that we put in jail and the resources it takes to, feed somebody and clothe somebody, and the power that goes into keeping these jails on. Like, to me, jails are just this, people are just spending their lives in these systems. Why? So we can punish them. And it comes back to so many things. Like, what if there were more preventative things that we could do? Or is there must be a better way, I guess, like, all in all, we're just trying to figure out so much as humanity. There is no, in my opinion, right or wrong. It's just a matter of trying to figure everything out. And we have a lot of archaic systems, and we have things that are perpetuated and are so challenging to shift. Like, it's so challenging to shift the way that we eat. It's challenging to shift the way that we think. It's challenging to shift the way that we act and treat one another. And that's why it's just so gray, in my opinion. It's not black and white on any of these issues. So it's really about that awareness, about that compassion, and doing the best that we can. Trying not to be too hard on ourselves in the process. And I think that's the other thing that that is challenging for me about social media is that when I go on social media and see people with really strong opinions and these arguments that happen in the threads of Facebook, for example, and I just think like, wow, is it really worth spending our time and energy just going on social media and arguing? Is that entertainment? Does that make people feel good, or does that make people feel worse? It makes me feel worse. Like, I don't want to participate in an argument, let alone read an argument, all these debates that happen, when I just feel like there's so many gray areas. Like, who am I to say? You know, I think we're all kind of figuring things out as we go along. Vi said it's always that problem, always extreme opinions in the USA instead of normal discussions. Yeah, and I think social media kind of thrives on extremes. It thrives on all these extreme scenarios, extreme behaviors, and to me that's just really intense. Like, it's very hard for me, and I don't really want to be part of it. Okay, before I wrap up this video, it's past midnight, and I do have some things I want to accomplish before I go to sleep. I did want to read some comments. Let's see here. I almost feel like I should do a whole separate video on comments, but I'll do them now. I'm so glad that you guys enjoyed the New Orleans video last week. And Craig asked if I figured out what the sound was at the end of my video. No, I was staying, if you haven't seen it yet, I was staying in this like little Airbnb, and it was like a little like unsettling to be there by myself, because I don't know, just the way that it was situated. There was like some weird sound at the end of that video, which I never figured out, but obviously I'm fine, so nothing bad happened. Rachel said, I was talking about how I've worked in my sleep. Like, I have had so much anxiety build up that it usually comes out in my sleep. And Rachel was just reflecting on how her husband only sleeps like half the time. Like, he's never fully sleeping. And man, that is not a great feeling at all. I finally caught up on some sleep. Oh gosh, there's so many comments here. I feel like I should just do a separate video. I think that's what I'm going to do, because it's been so long since I've really dug into the comments, and I appreciate people that write comments and don't require a response. That means so much to me that you guys understand that, and just know that I really do care. I really do listen. It's just that I have been really struggling with responding to things, and just that's an overwhelming thing for me. So I truly appreciate anything that you guys write, and I appreciate you watching. I really value you and love getting to know each of you. Like, the more I see your usernames and you sharing your stories and your comments and your opinions, it's just like so wonderful for me. I feel like this is a conversation, even though it doesn't always feel like it's back and forth, except for those of you who write comments live. That's always really nice. So thank you for that. Thank you for watching. Thanks for being part of my life. Thanks for reflecting on things with me. Thanks to Ninia for being here. Good night to you. And I'll see you guys soon. I will try to get back on track with my live videos every Monday at 5 p.m. Bye, everyone. Bye, Vince. Thanks for being here, Vince, and being part of the conversation. Vince is somebody that I know personally, and it's always nice to see people like you, Vince, online. So I look forward to seeing you next time. And check out that Long Shot documentary. I think you'll find it fascinating. Good night. Galagma, if I'm saying that right, and BB, who I think maybe just joined to say hi, but hello back to you, and goodbye simultaneously. Bye, guys.